Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Tuesday, August 10th, 2021, and today I'm going to be talking about the Senate infrastructure package. Now, before we get into it, I do want to address the elephant in the room that Governor Andrew Cuomo has officially resigned the office of governor. Now, the lieutenant governor will become the first woman governor of the state, but more on that later today as we get into the more political implications about such a resignation and when we would actually start to see the resignation take into effect, because as of right now, Andrew Cuomo will be the governor for the next 2 weeks, and then it'll officially take place. But enough about that. Today we're talking primarily about the infrastructure package, the $1 trillion package that just passed the United States Senate with a vote of 69 to 30. You heard me correctly. A bill that otherwise was deemed as doomed in the United States Senate, with not many Republicans ending up supporting this bill, has ultimately passed even with the votes of Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell and a number of other Republicans. 19 total Republicans crossed over party lines to back the Democratic Party on this infrastructure package. It's detailed as bipartisan because of the sheer amount of Republican support. Now, while most Republicans did vote against it in the United States Senate, it is a major point that at least 10 came across to avoid such a filibuster, came across to end the debate on this infrastructure package, and now officially passing it. It's $1 trillion. It's not nearly as ambitious as we thought the package would be starting out, but that is something that can be addressed later on, as we will talk about in this video. So, all in all, what's happening here? This $1 trillion package allocates $550 billion for people around the nation, for $65 billion for high-speed internet access, $110 billion for roads, $25 billion for airports around the nation. The most funding ever for the Amtrak since its inception in 1971. I'm sure Joe Biden is very happy about that one. You know, looking at what is happening here, this $1 trillion is primarily going to infrastructure and infrastructure alone. It's not really dabbling into welfare benefits or other types of things that Nancy Pelosi and Joe Biden and other Democrats originally thought would be added into this. Otherwise, it really wouldn't have passed 69 to 30. If anything, it would have passed 51 to 50, with Vice President Kamala Harris breaking the tie. But this is a major win for the Democratic Party, a major win for Republicans in a sense, and looking at the amount of senators that voted yes, and the 31 are actually here. I'm going to clarify, of these 31, one did not vote. So 30 voted no, one did not vote, but 69 voted in the affirmative. 69 said, yes, I want this bill to pass. And you can see that the support goes all the way across the nation, from coast to coast. Now, Florida, of course, doesn't really continue that, up and down coast type of support. But point being that many Republicans crossed over party lines, even from some very Republican states, such as West Virginia. Shelley Moore Capito crossed over to vote with the Democratic Party. In Idaho, both Idaho senators, large Republican state, staunch Republicans in the United States Senate, still voted with the Democratic Party. You have Deb Fischer from the state of Nebraska. You have Mitch McConnell in the state of Kentucky. Romney in Utah. Both Alaska Republican senators. I mean, what's happening here is that the Republican Party, the minority leader, and a number of other notable ones have crossed over party lines to vote for the infrastructure package, potentially to help themselves in their re-election bids in 2022. In fact, 3 of them are in moderately competitive races: Chuck Grassley in Iowa, Rob Portman in Ohio, and Lisa Murkowski in Alaska. Portman says that he's retiring, but any type of boost for the GOP in terms of popularity in that Senate position, of course, would eventually help the potential nominee. Chuck Grassley and Lisa Murkowski have yet to announce whether or not they are running or not for re-election, but the assumed default is that they will be running for re-election, but they might end up surprising us. But all in all here, what we are seeing happen is that the Republican Party is crossing over and realizing that this infrastructure package is widely popular across the American public. Back when it was introduced in April, 56% of Americans endorsed and supported Joe Biden's infrastructure proposal. That wasn't enough to convince all of these Republicans to cross over. 4 months later, I kid you not, 4 months later, we are in a very similar position, but the numbers have gotten better. Over 70% of voters backed the bipartisan agreement. 72% of Americans believe that this $1 trillion bill is something that should pass in the United States Senate. Much more of a benefit for both parties, with 72% of the country in agreement versus just 56%. Because at that time that poll was taken, there had been times where Joe Biden's approval rating had fluctuated around 56%. So the Republican Party, I think, in a sense back then, viewed it as, while the overwhelming overwhelming majority or just majority of the nation does support the infrastructure package, it's not enough to push a lot of Republican senators onto the bill. Now that 72% of the nation in August, months later, meaning the support hasn't decreased, as sometimes it is expected as the American public learns more and more about it, 72% support the bipartisan infrastructure bill. Such a major change in overall American public support. Enough so that these 19 Republicans crossed over with the Democrats. And it also is a point of interest that many Democrats decided to vote with it. I mean, the Democratic Party did not need all of their senators in order to pass this bill. I'm sure that there were some who had initial reservations, such as Joe Manchin from West Virginia or Kyrsten Sinema from the state of Arizona, but they were key negotiators. Kyrsten Sinema especially working with the Republican Party, using this as a way to pass a bill through a bipartisan method. What's happening across the nation in this particular bill is that it can be celebrated by Republicans and Democrats alike, because 72% of the nation agreed with it. For reference, Joe Biden only won 52% of the vote back in 2020, which means that there are plenty of voters that backed Donald Trump, supported him, Black Donald Trump, Republicans, independents, whatever it might be, that did not support Joe Biden. A lot of them end up supporting this infrastructure bill, possibly because of the increased amount of bipartisan efforts on it. It's not a sole Democratic bill at this point. So what are the steps moving forward? Now that this has passed the United States Senate, that seems to be it, right? That's what we're taught, growing up, learning in our civics class and our government's class. But that's not what's happening here. Nancy Pelosi and the House Democrats have to vote on this, and they need to pass it because the House support is actually much more reduced than the support in the United States Senate. What's happening here is that this will move on to the House, and Nancy Pelosi, joined by 100 progressive caucus members, have said that they will not vote on this bill unless a $3.5 trillion package is added on for benefits for people around the nation. $3.5 trillion in addition to this $1 trillion package that was just passed in the United States Senate. And I know what you might be thinking. How could there be a $3.5 trillion package passed if it was already trouble passing a $1 trillion one? Do you think that the Democrats are going to start peeling away some of these Republicans and trying to keep them on as the vote continues? No. Nancy Pelosi wholeheartedly expects the Democratic Party to use budget reconciliation. This is a way to pass budget legislation in the United States Senate without it having the possibility of being filibustered. Budget reconciliation bills cannot be filibustered, but this budget reconciliation can only be used once or twice during some type of session. The rules are a little convoluted, but the Democratic Party has used it to their advantage back in earlier this year when they passed the stimulus checks to go out to millions of people around the nation. That's what they're trying to do now, just not stimulus checks, but instead additional funding for welfare and other things that benefit Americans across the nation. So this $3.5 trillion package is expected to be passed through budget reconciliation, which means that Republicans will not support it. Republicans have been extremely critical about using the budget reconciliation option for Democrats because they are entirely bypassing the bipartisan experience of the United States Senate. The filibuster prevents bills this large from being passed, but Democrats have found a workaround, and Republicans absolutely can use this workaround the next time they are in control of the United States Senate. But for right now, Democrats practically have free reign when it comes down to this. Now, there are certain things that they cannot pass through this because of the parliamentarian, who technically doesn't have much of a role in actually what can and cannot be done, but does tell the Senate Democrats what they can and cannot do. And typically speaking, they listen to them. But what's happening with budget reconciliation is that the Republican Party will not back it, which means that the support for that $3.5 trillion package will go from what the $1 trillion package was at 69-30 down to 50-50, with Vice President Harris breaking the tie. I mean, look at the dramatic reduction in blue support there, blue being those in the affirmative of such bills. This is the map that was the $1 trillion package that was passed today. And this is the one that we largely expect. This is the breakdown that we largely expect as a result of this $3.5 trillion package. And the American public is just as split. You see, 72% of Americans support the bipartisan agreement. But when asked about the $3.5 trillion spending bill, just 51% say they are opposed to it and 49% say they are in favor. It's nearly 50-50. It nearly replicates what we expect to see on the Senate floor. It's quite fascinating to see that the American public is in so much support of the $1 trillion package, but when you add on more than triple of what the original one was, the public starts to turn away from it in a very heavy way. You don't just go from 72% down to 49%, for simple reason. The Republican Party has been vehemently attacking this $3.5 trillion package, but Nancy Pelosi has also been very clear. She is saying quite literally that she will not vote on this. This will not be something that will pass the United States House of Representatives if they do not add in the $3.5 trillion package, saying whatever you can achieve in a bipartisan way, bravo, we salute it. But at the same time, we're not going to move forward with leaving people behind. Saying that while this package is great, this $1 trillion to pass, sure, we would love for this to pass in the House of Representatives, but they are going to leverage their control in the House of Representatives against the Senate Democrats. And while it may seem like the Democrats are going to have to hop through a lot of hurdles, that's just how things tend to work in trifectas. You are being threatened and leveraged by your own political party because that's what happens. That's what is utilized in these trifecta type of governments, because now Nancy Pelosi can say, all I need is 5 Democrats to not vote for it. And over 90 House of Representative members, nearly adding up to 100, over 90 have said that they will not vote for this $1 trillion bill unless the 3.5 is passed through budget reconciliation, which also extends the timeline for this. Because what this means now is that we have to wait until the House of Representatives is back in session. And while that's just in around a month, that's still a month before this infrastructure bill can actually pass. In addition, budget reconciliation might take a little bit of time. So Democrats right now are on a running clock here. They need to be able to pass this quickly in order for the American public to see the benefits before the 2021 elections or going into 2022. It's like they're at a shot clock at a basketball game, right? They need to be able to be in this position where they are able to shoot the ball and get it in. And if they don't, well, then they end up failing and they ended up losing. And that's exactly what the Democratic Party, I think, is really trying to avoid here. The Democrats have been trying so hard to get this slam dunk through the trifecta, trying to flaunt at every single point that they have Joe Biden in office. They have Chuck Schumer in the Senate Majority Office. They have Nancy Pelosi as the Speaker of the House. But they seem to be unable to get around the Republican Party on almost every level. In fact, they seem to be messing up because of members of their own team. You have Kyrsten Sinema, Joe Manchin, who are saying that they're not even going to pass it through budget reconciliation unless there are major changes to what is being proposed for that $3.5 trillion. Or when it came to the case of COVID-19, reducing it by 40 million off a $1.9 trillion package. Things that seem negligible, but are enough to entirely hold up the United States Senate, entirely hold up the Democratic Party's agenda. And that's where it gets tricky. Politics is very messy. We know this. We understand this. But unfortunately, for the American people, they will likely not reap the benefits of this until next year. And that's also bad for Democrats because they need to ensure that this goes in quickly and comes out quickly. Because if Americans don't even remember the infrastructure bill when they start benefiting from it, who are they going to believe actually put this through? If Republicans can change the narrative over the next 2 months while this is slowly being implemented, then it starts to get negative for Democrats. Right now, all across the media, you're either talking about Cuomo or you're talking about infrastructure. What happens when this passes the House and then it takes months for it to get there? The American public forgets. Everything about politics is also optics. If Democrats are in a position where they're being vulnerable by members of their own party and they're not passing things quickly as they should be, then the American public is going to say, okay, maybe it's time for a different party in office. Maybe it's time for the Republican Party to be in the House, but the Democrats in the Senate, so they're forced to work together. And spoiler alert, typically speaking, they never work together. It is very difficult to get things done in Washington, D.C., and we are seeing it happen right in front of us. Nancy Pelosi is leveraging exactly what the Senate really wanted to avoid. And it's actually quite interesting to see how the politics has unfolded, because this could turn into this practically overnight. The 69-30 to 50-50 could just be the standard rundown of what our American political system works like. The Democratic Party and the Republican Party works together on one thing, but then when you add on again, the Republicans are completely opposed to it. In addition, the Republican Party, I think, is really trying to ensure that they have a good chance at winning in 2022 when it comes down to the Senate and House elections. As Representative Chip Roy from the state of Texas has said that the Democratic Party is in this position where they want to pass everything and they are overly ambitious. But the Republican Party's job is not to pass pieces of their own legislation or not to work with the Democrats to pass bipartisan pieces of legislation, but rather block the Democrats at every chance they get. Because if Democrats can't get things done by 2022, the American public will turn on them, the same way they are starting to turn on them now. This may be a major win for Democrats, but they need to continue pushing forward. If they are blocked by Pelosi, it will look, on the outside at least, as a very big political misstep, especially since the Senate is otherwise viewed as the more conservative, more moderate wing of Congress right now, whereas the House seems to be, in this position where they could actually block something that they seem to wholeheartedly support but will not pass unless the Democrats use budget reconciliation in order to pass an additional $3.5 trillion bill. So major takeaways here is that while this is a major win for Democrats and Republicans, it is still heavily tempered by Nancy Pelosi. Neither party could come out on top after this, but primarily speaking, the Democratic Party will look the worst considering 30 Republicans voted against it. And the bill is very popular. It also helps the nation. So the American public will start to see benefits from it, and it just helps everyone. But this bill isn't exactly something that won't be, harming the deficit. It seems to add, nearly $250 billion to the deficit after 10 years, but we will see what the Democratic Party can try to do to combat that, working with the GOP. But Democrats are going to likely do that $3.5 trillion bill without any Republican votes, and they can do it because of budget reconciliation. It's just a method that has been scrutinized by many members of the Republican Party. Bipartisanship can work as displayed by this effort, but sometimes it falls flat on its face. Sometimes it's just too polarized, too argumentative to even get to that position, and you can see it happen right here with the bill. The first part, 19 Republicans say A-OK. The next part, no Republicans seem to be heavily on board. In fact, the American public seems to be more turned against this than they are even Joe Biden as president of the United States. So right now, generally speaking, there isn't much hope for Democrats to come out on top fully with this. Of course, this is a major win, but there are still some things that they are either going to make a certain portion of the American public angry or, altogether just going to have to go through a non-bipartisan route in order to appease the House of Representatives, which is largely viewed as the chamber that doesn't necessarily hold things up as much as the United States Senate, but it seems for the case of the infrastructure bill, the roles have reversed. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2022 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.